Do not look away. For what you are about to hear was never meant for you, never meant for anyone. Hidden in the sealed ledgers of a small Missouri town lies the account of a child who should never have existed. A boy whose presence drew death, like a magnet draws iron. A boy whose smile could disarm, but whose eyes betrayed something that science, even at its most advanced, still cannot define. His name was Timothy Caldwell. 8 years old, fragile, innocent in appearance only. The summer of 1867 was supposed to mark the rebirth of Sedalia County. The Civil War had ended just 2 years earlier, but its scars ran deep across the families of Missouri. Widows worked the fields alone. Children grew up in silence, waiting for fathers who would never return. Among them walked Timothy, the orphan son of a soldier and a sickly mother, placed in the reluctant care of an uncle hardened by grief. No one questioned the arrangement. Farms needed hands, and mouths, if small, needed feeding. Yet from the moment Timothy stepped onto the Caldwell land, the air seemed to change. Neighbors spoke of unease, though none could explain why. Animals stirred when he approached. Chickens refused to forage near the fence line. Horses shied when his pale eyes fell upon them. His manners were perfect. Always yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Yet his presence lingered like a storm cloud, heavy, watchful, unnatural. Dr. Samuel Harding, the region's only trained physician, noticed it first. He wrote in his journal, "The child unsettles me. He is polite, composed, attentive, yet there is something in his gaze, an intensity, as though he studies me the way I study the dying." Harding could not name the cause, but his instincts, sharpened on battlefields drenched in blood, warned him of a truth he dared not speak aloud. Within 6 months, 3 people were dead. Each death was an accident, or so the town believed. A girl drowned in shallow water. An old man fell from a bluff he had climbed 100 times before. A boy disappeared into the woods, only to be found broken in a well. And at the center of every discovery, standing silently, offering explanations no one asked for, was Timothy. The people of Sedalia called it coincidence. Harding did not. He began to write, and the pages of his journals tell us what the town would not admit. Timothy Caldwell was not like other children. He was something else. The Caldwell farm lay 15 miles south of Sedalia, its fields carved from stubborn soil, its fences weathered by years of neglect. To most, it was a place of struggle and survival, no different from the dozens of homesteads that dotted the Missouri Valley. But to those who lived closest, the farm carried a different reputation. Quiet whispers of bad luck, of animals sickening without cause, of crops failing where others thrived. When Timothy arrived in the spring of 1866, the whispers grew louder. His Uncle Thomas, a man forged by war and hardened by loss, saw only another mouth to feed, another body to put to work. His wife, Sarah, sharp of tongue and bitter in her childless years, welcomed Timothy with cold tolerance rather than warmth. To them, the boy was a burden. But Timothy never complained. He worked from dawn to dusk, carrying out tasks with a precision far beyond his years. He never slowed. He never asked for rest. The neighbors watched him from a distance. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose land bordered the Caldwell farm, was the first to notice. She told her husband, "That boy works like a machine, not like a child. There's no play in him, Samuel, not a shred." She also noticed the way her chickens behaved, clustering together whenever Timothy walked near, their wings shivering, their cries shrill and panicked. Animals, she said, could sense what people could not. The first death came in August of that year. Mary Fletcher, 5 years old, was the daughter of the town blacksmith, a lively child, known for her laughter, her wandering feet. On a hot afternoon, she strayed too close to Willow Creek. By dusk, she was gone. It was Timothy who brought the news. He arrived at the Fletcher home pale-faced, his clothes damp. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, voice steady, "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." The men ran at once, only to find the little girl face down in water no deeper than 18 inches. Dr. Harding examined the body. A tragic drowning, he ruled, though he could not silence the question stirring in his mind. How had the girl fallen? Why so little struggle in the shallow stream? And why was Timothy able to describe the scene with such precision? The angle of her limbs, the snag of her dress, when most children would be too shocked to notice. At her funeral, Timothy sat bowed, his expression solemn, respectful. But Eleanor Patterson, watching from across the church, saw the truth. His eyes remained dry, cold, measuring, studying grief the way a scientist studies a specimen. This was no accident, she would whisper later. It was a beginning point 3 weeks past. Grief had barely settled over the Fletcher family when death returned, this time claiming an old man who had survived storms, wars, and the wilderness itself. His name was Henrik Larsen, a Norwegian immigrant, known for his strength in his youth and his stubbornness in his age. He had long tended wild beehives atop Devil's Bluff, a rocky outcrop overlooking the same creek where Mary Fletcher had drowned. For years he had climbed it with ease, despite the protests of neighbors who feared the 40-foot drop. Henrik always laughed them off. "These bluffs raise me," he would say. "They'll bury me one day, but not yet." In September of 1866, the bluffs kept his promise. Henrik's body was discovered broken at the base of the cliff, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. And once again, it was Timothy Caldwell who made the discovery. "I saw Mr. Larsen's hat caught on a thorn bush," Timothy told the gathered crowd. "I called out to him. He didn't answer. So I climbed down. He was already gone." His voice was calm, steady, neither frightened nor shaken. Dr. Harding examined the body and found signs of a fall. Death had been instant, and yet something was wrong. Scattered around Henrik's corpse were dozens of bees, dead in strange concentration. Harding climbed to the top of the bluff, expecting to find a disturbed hive, but the bees above were untouched, still busy among the late summer flowers. The townspeople accepted Timothy's explanation. Perhaps Henrik had been stung, perhaps he panicked, perhaps he fell. But Samuel Patterson did not. He muttered to Harding after the examination. That old man knew those bluffs like the back of his hand. He never stumbled. Never. Don't make sense. And Harding, though silent, agreed. 2 deaths, 2 tragedies, and 1 child at the center of both. Timothy attended Henrik's funeral with the same quiet solemnity he had shown for Mary Fletcher. He stood with his aunt and uncle, head bowed, hands clasped neatly in front of him. He spoke only when spoken to. He even expressed sympathy to Henrik's son, offering words of comfort no child should know how to shape. But Harding, watching from the back of the church, saw something chilling. Timothy's sympathy was perfect, too perfect. His tone, his posture, his choice of words, all precise, like an actor who had studied his role to flawless execution. Harding wrote that night, "The boy does not grieve. He observes. He records. And I fear he learns." By the end of September, Sedalia County was already uneasy. 2 deaths in as many months, both linked in one way or another to the presence of the Caldwell boy. Whispers crept through the community, though never above a murmur. To speak suspicion against a child was dangerous, even unthinkable. But unease clung to Timothy like a shadow. It was the 3rd death that stripped away the illusion of coincidence. 6-year-old Jacob Mills was last seen playing near the woods by his family's cabin. His laughter carried across the yard that evening, then faded into silence. When his mother called for him, there was no reply. The search began at once, neighbors scouring the underbrush with lanterns, voices echoing into the dark. For 3 nights, nothing. Timothy joined the search parties, his endurance remarkable for a boy of 8. He walked farther, longer, than grown men accustomed to the land. He guided them through thickets and ravines with uncanny familiarity, as though the forest had whispered its secrets to him. When asked how he knew the terrain so well, he gave a simple answer: "I like to explore." On the 4th morning, pale from exhaustion but strangely composed, Timothy appeared at the Mills cabin. His voice was flat, almost weary. "I think I found something. There's an old well half a mile north. I heard crying." The well was hidden beneath fallen logs and brush, its opening nearly invisible. Yet there at the bottom lay Jacob, alive but barely. 4 days of exposure had withered him to a husk of skin and bone. The rescue came too late. He died within hours. Dr. Harding was troubled. The concealment around the well was too precise to be natural. Logs arranged as though by careful hands. Brush layered to hide the opening from sight. He wondered, how could Timothy have heard crying from such depths, muffled by debris? Worse still was what Harding observed in the Mills cabin as Jacob slipped away. Families wept, mothers prayed, fathers cursed the heavens, and in the corner sat Timothy, lips moving silently, his pale eyes fixed upon the dying child. Harding recognized it instantly, not prayer but study. The boy was watching every gasp, every flicker of consciousness, the way a physician would monitor a patient in the final moments of life. And when Jacob's body finally stilled, Harding saw something that confirmed his darkest fear. Timothy did not flinch. He did not weep. His expression was one of calm and satisfaction. The abandoned, well-haunted Dr. Harding long after Jacob Mills was buried. By day he tended to the sick and wounded of Sedalia County, but at night his thoughts returned to that place, a pit in the earth, a grave disguised as an accident. He rode out alone under cover dusk to study it once more, lantern in hand. The logs covering the opening were not scattered by storm or wind. They were placed, each angle to form a camouflage so natural that only deliberate intent could explain it. Harding crouched in the dirt, tracing the arrangement with his fingers, and a suspicion took root like a poison vine. Someone had put the boy there. Someone had wanted him hidden. But who and why? Harding's mind circled the truth he could not name. He thought of Timothy's uncanny knowledge of the woods, of his unerring ability to lead searchers into the right places, of his strange calm in the face of horror. He thought of the expression he had seen, the faint glimmer of satisfaction, as Jacob's final breath rattled free. The physician began to keep notes, detailed and meticulous. Every encounter with Timothy was documented, his words, his expressions, his questions. And the questions disturbed him most of all. One autumn afternoon, during a routine visit to the Caldwell farm, Timothy lingered at his side as Harding examined Sarah Caldwell's lungs. When the doctor packed his instruments away, Timothy spoke in his quiet, measured way. "How do you know if someone is really dead?" Harding paused, unsettled. "Why would you ask me that?" "Sometimes," Timothy replied, eyes fixed and unblinking. "People just look like they're sleeping. How can you tell the difference?" The physician searched for an answer that would soothe the child, but the boy's expression betrayed no fear, no childish dread of death, only curiosity. Pure, clinical, cold. Neighbors soon brought their own accounts. Livestock died without cause, chickens with cleanly broken necks, pigs with precise wounds that festered, horses lamed by injuries too strange to explain. Always near the Caldwell land. Always when Timothy was seen wandering the fence lines, polite and smiling, as though nothing was amiss. To the townsfolk, these were misfortunes, accidents, the cruel hand of fate. But Harding saw the pattern, a circle widening, a shadow deepening. And at its center, an 8-year-old boy with pale blue eyes, WY October of 1866. Harding's doubts hardened into dread. He had seen too much. He had lived through war, through battlefields where men were reduced animals by fear or hunger. Yet never had he encountered a presence like this child. Timothy did not belong to the world of children, nor even the world of men. He was something else. Harding began to probe gently, using his role as physician to move among the families of Sedalia. He asked questions, subtle at first, then sharper. Had they noticed anything strange about the boy? Did he linger near their homes? Did he ever come uninvited? The stories emerged like drops of blood staining snow. James Wickham spoke of calves strangled in their ropes, their bodies twisted as though guided into death rather than stumbling into it. Robert Dunham lamented the loss of his prize bull, a beast strong and sure-footed that somehow slipped into a ditch and broke its leg. And Eleanor Patterson's chickens, 17 of them in 2 months, each killed neatly, their necks broken clean as if by practiced hands. Harding examined the remains himself. These were no accidents. The breaks were too precise, the wounds too deliberate. This was not the chaos of predators. This was controlled, calculated, and always someone had seen the boy, walking fence lines, standing in fields, his blond hair catching the sun, his small frame upright and still, watching, always watching. The physician's journal grew heavier with each entry. He wrote not as a doctor, but as a witness, cataloging something that defied both science and faith. "The child has knowledge of anatomy," he recorded. "Knowledge beyond his years, beyond his instruction. He strikes with purpose. He observes suffering with the eye of a scholar, and he hides it all beneath the mask of obedience." But Harding was careful. To accuse a child openly was unthinkable. He would be ridiculed, dismissed as a man shaken by too many years of war. So he held his tongue, and the silence of Sedalia held with him. Meanwhile, Timothy thrived. He worked without rest. He attended church, his head bowed in piety. He addressed elders with flawless courtesy. To the casual eye, he was a model of innocence. But Harding knew the truth. Innocence was a mask, and behind it lurked something colder than any man he had ever met in the blood-soaked fields of war. The Missouri autumn deepened. The leaves turned, the air sharpened, and with each passing week, Timothy Caldwell grew more visible, not in the way of children seeking attention, but in the way of shadows, present where one least expected, silent where silence was unnatural. Neighbors began to notice his strange habits. Eleanor Patterson swore she saw him standing in her field at dawn, motionless, staring at her livestock with that pale, unblinking gaze. When she called out, he raised a hand in greeting, calm, polite, and walked back across the fence line without explanation. Others told similar stories. Timothy appearing on paths far from his farm, watching from a distance, never intruding, yet always close enough to remind him he was there. Harding recorded it all. He is everywhere, the physician wrote. Everywhere misfortune follows. He knows things he should not know. He asks questions no child should ask. And the questions continued. During a visit to the Caldwell home, Timothy lingered again, his voice measured, deliberate. How long does it take for someone to die if their breath is stopped? Harding froze. Why would you wonder such a thing, Timothy? The boy looked at him with that eerie calm. Uncle Thomas says I should know how to help if someone can't breathe. I just wondered how long I'd have to try before it's too late. It was a reasonable answer. Too reasonable. Harding recognized it as a shield. Words placed with precision to mask intent. Meanwhile, the deaths of animals continued. Cows strangled in ropes they should have slipped free from. Horses crippled by falls no one witnessed. Dogs vanishing, never to return. Always within walking distance of the Caldwell farm. Always with Timothy near. Harding wrestled with his conscience. He was a man of science, trained to see patterns, to demand evidence. Yet what evidence could he offer? A child's presence? A child's questions? To accuse him would be to invite scorn, perhaps ruin. And so the town carried on, blind and deaf as shadow at heart. Families prayed in church, hands folded, eyes closed. Children laughed and played in the dusty streets. Life in Sedalia seemed to stumble forward toward normalcy. But Harding saw what others would not. Each death, each misfortune, each whisper of unease was a step deeper into something vast, something ancient, something that had chosen Timothy Caldwell as its vessel. The physician began to fear, not only for the town, but for his own soul that be why November. Harding's journals had become a confession of sorts. Each entry carried the weight of dread, as though writing was the only barrier between sanity and collapse. His handwriting grew more frantic, his observations more dire. He no longer spoke of coincidence. He no longer entertained doubt. Instead, he named what others would not. The boy is a predator. He wears a mask of innocence, but beneath it is a coldness that hungers. He learns from suffering. He thrives on it. Timothy's reputation among his peers was equally strange. The children of Sedalia rarely played with him. They did not mock him, nor did they exclude him openly. Rather, they avoided him with the same instinct that drives animals from fire. They could not explain it. But when Timothy's eyes lingered on them too long, their laughter faltered, their games dissolved, and they drifted away, uneasy and quiet. Yet adults found no fault. Thomas Caldwell spoke of his nephew's diligence with grudging pride. Sarah Caldwell praised his obedience, though her tone was flat, as though rehearsed. And in church, Pastor William Crane declared the boy a model of discipline, a shining example of youthful piety. But Eleanor Patterson knew better. She told her husband of a night when she awoke to see Timothy standing at the fence line, staring into their yard beneath the moonlight. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood, his thin silhouette framed by the pale glow, until she blinked and he was gone. Samuel Patterson dismissed it as dream or trick of the light, but Eleanor's hands trembled as she recounted it to Harding. She swore she had not dreamed. She swore the boy had been there. The animals confirmed her fear. The Pattersons' hens had ceased laying, their clucking restless, their eyes darting at shadows. Their dog, a loyal shepherd, refused to go near the Caldwell fence. It would bark and snarl, hackles raised, but if Timothy so much as glanced at it, the beast would fall silent and retreat, tail tucked between its legs. Harding understood the pattern. Children avoided Timothy out of instinct, animals recoiled in terror, and only adults, blinded by reason and civility, failed to see the truth. He does not belong among us, Harding wrote, and yet he thrives in our midst because we mistake his mask for virtue. The physician began to fear that the next death was not far away. Winter crept upon Sedalia, and with it came silence, the silence of snow muffling the land, of long nights broken only by the crackle of hearth fires. But beneath that quiet, something stirred. Misfortune, as though called by name, circled closer to the Caldwell farm. It began with the livestock. In December, Thomas Caldwell awoke to find one of his strongest horses dead in its stall. No signs of illness, no thrashing, no broken boards. The animal lay as if it had simply decided to stop breathing. Harding examined it, searching for cause, but found only stillness, perfect and complete. Days later, 2 calves were discovered tangled in their ropes, strangled in a way no beast could manage on its own. Their deaths were clean, without struggle, as though guided into suffocation by a steady hand. Harding noted the precision once again, the absence of chaos. And always, Timothy was near. When neighbors asked him about the animals, he answered with innocence. "I tried to help, but I was too late," he would say, his tone heavy with practiced regret. Adults nodded, comforted by his politeness. But Harding saw the truth in his eyes. The boy was not mourning. He was measuring, testing, recording. The physician's dread grew unbearable. He began to dream of the boy, dreams where Timothy stood at the foot of his bed, pale eyes gleaming, lips curled in a smile too subtle to name. In the dreams, Harding could not move. He could not speak. Only watch as the boy's small hand reached toward his chest, fingers curling as though to stop his breath. Each morning, Harding awoke drenched in sweat, his pulse hammering, his throat raw from silent screams. Yet Timothy, by daylight, remained a model of composure. He prayed in church. He answered questions in school with intelligence beyond his years. He worked the fields with tireless resolve. Adults praised him. Children avoided him. Animals fled from him. Harding's notes turned darker still. This is no ordinary child. His presence corrodes the living. His touch, unseen but felt, unravels the fabric of the natural order. If left unchecked, the deaths will not stop. They will multiply. And soon, even the strongest among us will fall. But the physician could not act. To accuse a boy was madness. To name what he truly feared, that Timothy was not merely cruel, but something other, was heresy. And so, Sedalia carried on, unaware that the heart of winter carried with it not only frost and hunger, but something far colder. Christmas came to Sedalia in muted tones. The war had drained joy from the land, and the hard winter made celebration a burden. Families gathered in small circles, candles lit, hymns sung in low voices. They prayed for survival more than for salvation. At the Caldwell farm, Thomas and Sarah hosted a modest supper. Harding was invited, as he often was, both for his role as physician and his lingering friendship with Thomas. He arrived weary, but grateful for warmth, determined to mask his growing dread. The table was laid with cornbread, smoked ham, and potatoes. The family bowed their heads as Pastor Crane offered prayer. Timothy sat between his aunt and uncle, hands folded neatly, posture perfect. He spoke the words of blessing with flawless precision, his voice steady and clear. And yet Harding could not take his eyes from him. When the prayer ended and food was served, Timothy ate politely, speaking little. But Harding noticed the details others ignored. The way the boy's eyes scanned the room, lingering on each guest, studying their movements. The way his fork and knife moved with deliberate rhythm, as though each motion was a test of control. After supper, the neighbors gathered near the hearth to sing. Children dozed against their mothers' laps, the firelight painting the room in soft gold. But Timothy did not rest. He sat upright, wide-eyed, watching, listening, as though the flicker of every flame, the shift of every shadow, spoke to him alone. Then came the moment Harding would never forget. A neighbor's infant, restless in the firelit room, began to cry. The sound pierced the air, shrill and relentless. Mothers soothed, fathers hushed, but the child wailed on. Timothy rose without a word and approached the cradle. He leaned over her, pale hair falling into the firelight, and whispered something too soft to be heard. The crying stopped at once. The infant's eyes opened wide, not in peace, but in silence, a silence too sudden, too absolute. For a breathless moment, the room froze. Then the baby let out a faint whimper, and the spell broke. Mothers exhaled. Fathers laughed nervously, and Thomas Caldwell praised his nephew's gentle touch. But Harding saw the truth in Timothy's gaze. The boy turned, met the physician's eyes across the firelight, and held them, cold, unblinking, a look not of comfort, but of power, a demonstration. Harding shuddered. The boy was showing him something, a message hidden in plain sight. I can silence life itself. And Harding knew then the deaths had only begun. January settled heavy upon Sedalia. The snow came in relentless waves, burying fences, silencing roads, sealing the town in its own isolation. And within that quiet, fear began to whisper, not openly, not in church or markets, but in the hushed conversations of neighbors behind shuttered windows. Another death had come, not livestock this time, not accident. A child, Martha Wickham, only 6 years old, was found lifeless in her bed. No fever, no cough, no sign of struggle. Her face lay calm, her eyes closed, her lips parted slightly as if in dream. The family wept, bewildered. The doctor, Harding himself, could find no cause. Her heart had simply ceased. The town mourned, but in its grief, Timothy Caldwell stood apart. He attended the burial in his finest clothes, standing beside his uncle, head bowed. Yet Harding watched him closely. The boy's stillness was too complete, his composure too flawless. Not a twitch, not a tear. Only the faintest curve of his lips, so subtle that none but Harding seemed to see. That night, Harding wrote by candlelight. This was no act of God. The Wickham girl was taken. Taken by the same hand that silenced the Patterson hens, the same presence that crushed the breath from Jacob Mills. I fear now that the boy has crossed the threshold, from animals to his own kind. Rumors spread, quiet but persistent. Eleanor Patterson whispered that she had seen Timothy near the Wickham property days before the child's death. Samuel Patterson scolded her, forbidding such talk. Yet the seed was planted. Mothers pulled their children close when Timothy passed by. Fathers, once welcoming, now nodded stiffly instead of offering warm words. And still, the boy moved with perfect grace. He carried firewood for the elderly. He read scripture aloud in church with clarity that shamed men twice his age. He smiled when spoken to, thanked every hand that offered him bread or water. But behind the courtesy lay something else. A presence. A weight. Harding felt it whenever Timothy entered a room, as though the air itself shifted, thickened, pressed down upon the living. The boy's gaze lingered not on faces but on throats, on chests, on the fragile pulse of life itself. In Sedalia, death had always been the work of illness, accident, or fate. But now, Harding knew, something unnatural had taken root, and it wore the face of a child. The death of Martha Wickham might have been dismissed as tragedy had it stood alone. But fate, or something darker, does not leave witnesses at peace. Only 2 weeks later, another child fell. Ezekiel Dunham, 9 years old, strong for his age, collapsed while hauling water from the well. His father found him sprawled on the frozen ground, bucket overturned, ice spreading beneath it. Harding was summoned at once, but Ezekiel was gone before he arrived. No bruises, no broken bones, no sign of seizure. His heart had simply stopped. Harding examined the boy in silence, dread gnawing through him. Again, he thought. Again without cause. Again without struggle. His hands shook as he wrote the death record, though his voice remained steady before the grieving family. The town began to murmur. 2 children in 1 month. Too close, too sudden. Fear spread like frost across glass. Seen but not spoken of, delicate yet unyielding. Mothers clutched their little ones tighter. Fathers sharpened their suspicions into whispers over firelit tables. And again, Timothy Caldwell was present, at the Dunham funeral. The boy stood near the casket, his hands folded, his lips moving silently in prayer. Harding, standing in the shadows, watched him without rest. The boy's gaze never wavered from the still body within the pine box. He did not blink. He did not sway. It was as though he were not mourning, but studying. Harding's notes grew frantic. He chooses deliberately. Animals first, children next. He advances by measure, by design. Each death is not accident, but experiment. He learns the threshold of breath, the moment where the spark of life extinguishes. I am certain now. He is not killing for need. He is killing for knowledge. The physician wrestled with his silence. To accuse the boy was to invite ridicule, perhaps worse. But his conscience twisted within him. For each moment he held his tongue, another child might fall. Then, one evening, Harding encountered Timothy alone. The boy was walking along the fence line, pale hair catching the dim winter light. He greeted the physician politely, as always. But before Harding could answer, Timothy asked in that calm, deliberate voice, "Doctor, do you think the soul leave the body all at once or slowly, like a candle burning out?" Harding's blood froze. His lips moved, but no answer came. Timothy only smiled faintly, nodded, and walked on into the snow. For the first time, Harding felt what others already had. Not merely suspicion, not merely fear, but the certainty that he was standing in the presence of death itself. By February, Sedalia was no longer a town of whispers. It was a town of watchful eyes. The string of deaths had carved suspicion into every home. Neighbors who once shared bread now locked their doors at night. Children were not allowed to wander far. Lamps burned longer into the dark. But no one spoke the name that should have been spoken. Timothy Caldwell remained untouched by accusation. Adults praised his good manners, his diligence in the fields, his solemn recitations of Scripture. He was invited to homes, to gatherings, to tables. He was trusted, but only by those who could not see. The children knew better. They avoided him with instinct sharper than reason. They crossed the street when he passed. They silenced their laughter when his pale figure appeared. And yet, when asked why, none could answer. They spoke in half-formed phrases, in frightened glances, in vague mutterings of, "He makes me feel strange." Animals, too, confirmed it. The Patterson shepherd refused to leave the house if Timothy stood near. Horses balked when he approached, their eyes rolling white. Chickens ceased laying when he lingered by the coops. Harding saw the pattern clearer than anyone. The physician's journal became a scripture of dread. The boy grows stronger. His presence deepens. He no longer asks questions of curiosity, but of certainty. He seeks not to learn, but to confirm. And each death brings him closer to what he desires. Yet none see it but I. None will act. And then came the night at the schoolhouse. The children were gathered for evening lessons. Pastor Crane instructed them by lamplight, his voice rising with psalms. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen ground. Within, warmth and routine held steady, until the lamps flickered. One by one, the flames sputtered, dimmed, then surged higher, casting long shadows across the walls. The children grew restless. Crane calmed them with prayer. But Harding, who had been present to collect a child's medicine, saw Timothy in the corner of the room. The boy's lips moved silently. His gaze was fixed upon the flame. And as his eyes narrowed, the lamplight wavered again. The children shrieked. The pastor shouted. But Timothy only watched calm, serene, as though the chaos belonged to him. When the light steadied, he looked up straight into Harding's eyes and smiled. Harding left at once, his heart pounding, his mind spiraling. For he understood Timothy was not testing animals, nor children, nor flame. He was testing dominion. Dominion over breath. Dominion over light. Dominion over the very order of life itself. And Sedalia slept on, blind beneath the weight of its own denial. W.Y. early March. The snow began to thaw, but with it came no relief. The earth softened. The roads turned to mud, and the graves, so many fresh graves, sank unevenly into the ground. Sedalia bore the look of a town worn thin, not only by winter, but by something unspoken that gnawed at its marrow. The deaths had ceased for a few weeks, but the silence was no comfort. Harding felt it for what it was, not reprieve but anticipation, the pause of a predator before it strikes again. And Timothy Caldwell moved through the pause with unnatural poise. He was seen often at the cemetery. Not playing, not grieving, not even praying. Simply standing. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer, hands clasped behind his back, eyes roaming the rows of headstones. Mothers who passed by hurried their children along. Fathers muttered about strange habits, but none dared forbid him. Harding did. One evening, as the last light bled from the horizon, the physician found Timothy among the graves. He approached, voice stern, heart-hammering. "Timothy," he said, "these are not places for boys." The child turned, face pale in the fading dusk, eyes too calm, too steady. "But, doctor," he replied, "isn't this where we all belong sooner or later?" Harding faltered. The boy's tone was not one of mischief, nor of melancholy. It was a statement of fact, spoken with the certainty of one who knew. The physician tried to dismiss him, tried to speak of games in childhood and God's timing. But Timothy interrupted, his voice soft, almost kind. "They are waiting," he said, nodding toward the graves. "All of them. Some leave quickly, some slowly. I think I understand now." Harding's blood chilled. Understand what? Timothy's lips curved into the faintest smile. "How it feels. The moment they stop. The quiet. It is beautiful." The boy turned back to the headstones, gaze lingering on the names carved in stone, as though greeting old friends. Harding fled that evening with trembling hands, his journal later stained with ink and sweat as he wrote. He no longer observes death. He admires it. He speaks as one who partakes in it, not as a witness. This is no boy. This is an emissary of silence, wearing the flesh of a child. And the physician knew with a clarity sharper than ever before. If the town did not act soon, it would not only bury its children, it would bury itself. Spring tried to push its way into Sedalia, but thaw only revealed rot. The river swelled with melted snow, carrying with it branches, carcasses, and the stench of decay. Roads turned to rivers of mud. The town was restless, tired, starved for hope. But hope could not bloom where Timothy Caldwell walked. The boy was no longer merely strange. He was unavoidable. His presence lingered in every gathering, his pale figure slipping into sermons, suppers, markets. And wherever he went, silence followed. Laughter dimmed. Songs faltered. Even the most stubborn of fathers lowered their voices in his presence, though they could not say why. Then, in late March, the Dunhams lost another child. Little Abigail, for years old, awoke screaming one night. Her parents rushed to her bedside, but before they could light the lamp, the cries stopped. When the flame flared, she was still. No fever, no breath, no struggle, only the same serene stillness that had marked the others. Harding was summoned, though he already knew what he would find. He wrote the death with hands stiff and clumsy, the ink blotting with the weight of repetition. The town's whispers grew louder. Too many children. Too quickly. Something was wrong. Yet when suspicion stirred, it twisted away from truth. Some blamed the river water. Others blamed war sickness, a malady carried from the battlefields by passing soldiers. Pastor Crane spoke of God's judgment. None spoke the boy's name aloud. None, save Harding. That evening, Timothy appeared at his door. The child stood in the lamplight, pale and still, his shadow long against the physician's wall. He asked in that calm, steady voice, "Did she suffer?" Harding's throat locked. "What do you mean?" "Abigail," Timothy said. "Did it hurt when she left?" The doctor tried to mask his fear with anger. "You speak of things no child should." But Timothy did not flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes reflecting the lamplight in a way no human eyes should. "You know, don't you? You see what they don't. That's why I like you, doctor. You understand." Harding could not answer. His hand trembled on the edge of his desk, his pulse roaring in his ears. Timothy smiled, soft, polite, almost tender. Then he turned and walked into the night without another word. Harding collapsed into his chair, sweat pouring down his back, the journal before him waiting for words. But none came. For the first time, the physician could not bring himself to write. To write was to acknowledge, and to acknowledge was to damn himself with truth. And still, in the silence of his home, Harding heard the echo of the boy's voice. "You understand. April came with rain, heavy and unending. The fields drowned, the roads washed out, and the grave swelled with water. Coffins shifted in the earth. The churchyard stank of damp soil and rot. The town's grief ripened into unease. No one spoke it plainly, but every home now lived in dread of nightfall. Families locked their shutters, prayed longer, watched their children's breathing as they slept. Fear had become the marrow of Sedalia. Harding no longer slept. His journal grew thick with frantic entries, each one darker than the last. He is not bound by chance. He selects. He learns. Each death bears his mark. Yet none will see. None will act. I am alone in this. And yet Timothy thrived. His manners remained impeccable. His politeness flawless. He carried books to the pastor, fetched water for the widows, helped Thomas Caldwell mend fences. He was, in all visible ways, the model of a Christian boy. But Harding saw beneath the mask. One evening, he came upon Timothy by the river. The boy was kneeling at the water's edge, his hands submerged, holding something unseen. Harding approached quietly, but froze when he heard the child's voice. A whisper, low, rhythmic, not in prayer, not in scripture, but in some cadence older than words. The water churned softly around his wrists. Then Timothy lifted his hands. A fish lay limp across his palms, its gills flaring weakly. The boy watched it with solemn fascination. Then, slowly, deliberately, he closed his hands over it. Harding cried out before he could stop himself. The boy turned, startled, but only for a moment. His expression calmed, smoothed, and he smiled politely. He opened his palms. The fish was still. I was only watching, Timothy said. How quickly the light goes out. The physician's breath caught. His hands trembled. He wanted to run, to seize the boy, to cry his truth to the heavens. But he could not move. Timothy set the fish gently back into the water, where it drifted away, pale belly glinting beneath the current. Then he rose, brushed the mud from his trousers, and said with perfect courtesy, "Good evening, doctor." And he walked past Harding, leaving him alone by the riverbank, heart hammering like a trapped animal's. That night, Harding wrote only one line in his journal, scrawled in a hand nearly illegible. He practices now. May arrived, and with it, the first warmth of the year. Trees budded, birds returned, the air filled with the scent of thawed earth. To any traveler passing through Sedalia, it might have seemed a place of quiet rebirth, but those who lived there knew otherwise. For even as spring bloomed, the town remained hushed, its spirit bent. Joy did not return with the blossoms. Weddings were postponed, suppers shortened, gatherings avoided. The people carried their fear like a second skin, and Timothy Caldwell walked among them like a shadow. The boy had grown taller, his frame more angular, his face losing the softness of childhood, yet his composure only deepened. His words were chosen with precision, his silences heavy, his gaze unwavering. Then one Sabbath morning, the church bells rang, but not for worship. Ellen Weaver, aged 8, had been found dead in her bed, the fourth child in as many months. The town gathered in silence, the pews overflowing, the pastor trembling at the pulpit. He spoke of mystery, of trial, of the inscrutable will of God, but his voice cracked and none believed him. In the corner pew, Timothy sat motionless, his small Bible resting close upon his lap, his eyes fixed upon the casket. And Harding, seated near the back, felt the truth as keenly as he had ever felt the pulse of a fevered child. The boy was not mourning, he was savoring. That night, Harding wrote, the pattern is no longer hidden. He kills, and he watches us bury them. The grave is his theater, the mourning his music. The others will not see it, but I do. The town is his parish, and death his sermon. And then something happened that no man could dismiss. During the lowering of Ellen's coffin, the rope slipped. The casket lurched, cracked against the side of the grave, and split. For one breathless moment, the still form of the girl was visible, her face serene, lips parted, hands folded. And in that instant, Harding's eyes darted to Timothy. The boy's lips moved, just barely. No sound, only the faintest curl of a whisper. His eyes gleamed, bright as glass in sunlight, and he smiled. Not the polite smile he offered to elders, not the courteous mask of boyhood, but a smile raw and unguarded, a smile of recognition, a smile of possession. Harding staggered back from the grave, clutching his chest, bile rising in his throat. None saw what he saw, none but him. And in that moment, he understood with dreadful clarity. Timothy was no longer learning, no longer practicing. He was celebrating. After Ellen Weaver's burial, the town began to unravel. Mothers no longer sent their children to school. Fathers abandoned their fields to keep watch through the night. Rumors churned like the river after a storm, of curses, of poisoned wells, of spirits come to claim the innocent. Every explanation was offered, except the true one. Timothy Caldwell was more present than ever. He carried hymnals for the pastor. He fetched medicine for the elderly. He mended fences, swept porches, bowed his head in prayer at every table. He became, in appearance, indispensable. And in his presence, none could accuse him. For who would condemn a boy so dutiful, so mannerly, so devout? Only Harding. The physician's journal grew ragged with ink and fear. It is no longer a question of if, but when. He takes him as easily as one plucks fruit from a tree. His hands leave no mark, his method no trace. He moves through this town like a shadow with patience unending. They call it pestilence, they call it judgment, but I know it by its true name, design. One evening, Harding was summoned to the Caldwell home. Thomas Caldwell had collapsed at the table, pale and gasping, his heart failing. Harding worked feverishly, compressions, tinctures, bloodletting, but the man's life slipped away beneath his hands. When at last he stopped, sweat-soaked and shaking, Harding looked up. Timothy was standing in the corner, silent, watching. The boy's gaze was steady, unblinking, and in the physician read not grief, but curiosity, a hunger, quiet and intent. And when his mother wept and his sisters clung to one another, Timothy stepped forward, laid a hand upon his father's still chest, and whispered something so low Harding could not hear. Then he looked up at the physician and said, with the calm of a man thrice his age, "Thank you, doctor. You tried, but some things belong to me." Harding's blood ran cold. He wanted to cry out, to seize the boy, to drag him before the town. But fear held him, strangled him. For in Timothy's eyes he saw no child, no orphan of grief, no victim of tragedy. Only the terrible assurance of one who had been waiting for this moment all along. That night, Harding did not write in his journal. He burned its pages in the stove, watching the inked words curl and blacken in the flame. Yet even as the smoke filled his home, the truth remained etched in his mind, unburnable. Timothy had claimed his first parent. With Thomas Caldwell in the grave, Sedalia should have gathered itself in mourning. Instead, a deeper silence fell. The town had grown accustomed to burying children. But a father, a man in his strength, that was something else entirely. It was no longer sickness of the young. It was no longer explainable. And yet, no one spoke suspicion. The Caldwells were pitied, prayed for, fed. And Timothy, now fatherless, was spoken of with tenderness, with admiration. Poor boy, they said, so strong in his sorrow, so steady. Harding alone knew better. He saw the shift in Timothy's bearing. The boy carried himself with greater confidence now, no longer merely observed, but occupied. His steps rang louder, his silences pressed heavier, his eyes held longer, and the town bent to it without knowing, like grass to wind. Soon after the burial, Harding passed Timothy in the road. The boy was walking alone, hat in hand, face serene. He paused when he saw the physician. "Good morning, doctor," he said, his voice smooth, certain. Harding tried to reply, but his throat clenched. For Timothy's eyes lingered on him with a quiet recognition, as though reading his thoughts, measuring his fear. Then, with a polite nod, the boy added, "You understand better than the rest, don't you?" Harding nearly stumbled in the mud. His heart raced, his palms burned with sweat. But Timothy only smiled faintly, replaced his hat, and continued down the road. The physician stood rooted long after he was gone, breath shuddering in his chest. The boy's words echoed like a curse. "You understand." That night, Harding forced himself to begin a new journal, though his hands trembled so badly the ink splattered across the page. He wrote only this: "He grows bolder. The veil between what he is and what he shows slips thinner by the day. If none will speak, I must. But to accuse him is to sign my death." And then, as if an answer, Harding heard it, a faint sound at his window. He froze. The shutters rattled softly in the night wind. Slowly, dread mounting, he turned. There, just beyond the glass, stood Timothy. The boy's pale face was half lit by the moon, his eyes glimmering, his mouth curved in the smallest, most courteous of smiles. He did not knock. He did not speak. He only stood, and then, after a long, unbearable moment, he raised his hand in a slow, deliberate wave, and vanished into the darkness. After that night at the window, Harding could no longer deny it. Timothy Caldwell knew, not suspected, not wondered. Knew. The physician became a man besieged. He triple-bolted his door, barred his shutters, carried a lantern from room to room. Yet always he felt the boy's eyes on him, even in daylight, even among others. Every creak of floorboard, every whisper wind at the eaves felt like Timothy's breath at his neck. Still, the town praised the child. Women brought pies to the Caldwell home. Men spoke admiringly of his fortitude. Pastor Crane declared from the pulpit that the boy was a model of Christian perseverance. Harding nearly rose to shout him down. Nearly. But when Timothy turned in his pew and let his gaze rest upon the physician, Harding's words withered in his throat. He wrote feverishly in his new journal. The town bends to him as iron to a magnet. They love him. They revere him. He has bewitched them, though not by charm, but by inevitability. They are already his, though they do not know it. Then came the night of the storm. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the houses. Rain lashed against windows. Harding sat awake, unable to sleep, when a knock came at his door. 3 soft raps. Polite, patient. His lantern quivered in his hand as he approached. The knock came again in a voice, calm, measured, unmistakable. "Doctor, may I come in?" Harding froze. His mouth went dry. He did not answer. The silence stretched. Then the voice again, perfectly courteous. "It is only me. Only me." The physician backed away from the door, heart hammering, and did not move until dawn broke gray and wet across the town. When at last he dared to open his shutters, the porch was empty, save for a small pair of footprints in the mud. That day, Harding walked the town in a haze, searching for courage. He stopped at the Mercantile, the tavern, the church. He looked into faces, worried, weary, faithful, and tried to speak, to tell them, to warn them. But each time Timothy appeared, by the well, at the corner, in the doorway of the schoolhouse, watching silent, a shadow in plain sight. And Harding's words shriveled before they ever left his tongue. That night, Harding wrote only one sentence before slamming the book shut. "I am already dead." June arrived, and with it the heat. The air turned heavy, the nights close and stifling. Crops withered in the fields. Tempers frayed. The town seemed to breathe shallow, waiting, watching. And Timothy Caldwell flourished. He walked Sedalia with the composure of a grown man, his voice steady, his posture straight, his courtesy never failing. Children no longer played in the streets, but Timothy was everywhere, fetching, carrying, assisting, always a hand. The boy's presence had become inescapable. Harding felt himself suffocating. The physician's journal filled with broken lines, words scratched as though carved into the paper by desperation. It is not grief he feeds upon, but fear. He fattens on us, each silence a meal, each prayer an offering. He is not content with children now. He has tasted the grown. We are his flock, his harvest. Then came the night when the widow McCrae screamed. Neighbors rushed her home, lanterns blazing, to find her collapsed upon her parlor floor. Her face was pale, her lips blue, her eyes wide and empty. No wound, no fever, no sign of struggle. Only the same dreadful stillness Harding knew too well. And standing at her window, as though he had been keeping vigil, was Timothy. He explained himself calmly. He had heard her cry, had come to help, had fetched others. None doubted him. They praised his swiftness, his devotion. But Harding, arriving last, saw what the others missed. The faint trace of moisture on the boy's hands, as though freshly washed. And on his lips, the barest curl of satisfaction, gone in an instant, replaced by the polite solemnity they all adored. That night, Harding could not write. His hand would not obey him. Instead, he sat in darkness, lantern extinguished, staring at the door, waiting for the soft rap of Timothy's knock. It never came. But just before dawn, as exhaustion pulled him into a half-sleep, he heard it, a whisper, close to his ear, though no one stood beside him. "You will speak for me, won't you, doctor?" Harding woke gasping, clawing at the air. His journal lay open before him, though he had not touched it, and on the fresh page, in a hand not his own, for words were written. "You understand. You belong." By midsummer, Harding no longer recognized himself. His hands, one steady with scalpel and quill, shook without ceasing. His eyes were ringed with sleepless hollows. He spoke little, ate less. The town whispered of his decline, and Timothy Caldwell prospered. The boy now carried himself not merely as a survivor of tragedy, but as something greater, something inevitable. He stood taller, his silences longer, his words fewer but sharper. People deferred to him without knowing why. A man would pause in his sentence when Timothy entered the room. A woman would hush her child when Timothy's gaze lingered too long. No one named it, but all felt it. Harding wrote in fevered hand. He no longer hides. He need not. The town bends of its own accord. His courtesy is a leash, his silence a chain. We are not merely prey to him. We are congregation. One evening, Harding found himself walking toward the Caldwell home without will. His body moved as though drawn. The windows glowed with lamplight. Shadows passed behind curtains. He should have turned back. He did not. The door opened before he could knock. Timothy stood there. No hat, no shoes, just a boy in shirt sleeves, as though waiting. His expression was not warm nor cruel, but inevitable. "Doctor," he said softly, "you are late." Harding's mouth dried. He tried to speak, but only a croak escaped. Timothy stepped aside. "Come in." And Harding did. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No sound of mother, no rustle of sisters. Only the slow tick of the mantel clock, and the faint smell of candle wax. Timothy gestured to the chair by the table. Harding sat. His legs trembled. For a long time the boy said nothing, only watched. His eyes never blinked. His lips curled, almost kind. Then, at last, he spoke. "You see me as I am." Harding shook his head. His chest heaved. But Timothy leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "And I see you. You've always known. That is why I let you live." The words fell like stones into a well. Harding's stomach lurched. His hands clawed at the arms of the chair. Timothy straightened, smoothing his shirt with calm precision. His voice, when he spoke again, was courteous, unhurried. "You belong to me, doctor, as they all will. It is only a matter of time." Then he smiled, gentle, polite, inevitable, and dismissed him with a nod, as though the conversation had been nothing more than neighborly courtesy. Harding stumbled into the night, half mad, heart battering his ribs. He could not recall the walk home, only the words that looped endlessly in his skull. "You belong." After that night in the Caldwell home, Harding ceased pretend. He no longer told himself Timothy was a child corrupted by grief, nor that his suspicions might be madness. The veil was gone. The truth stood naked before him. The boy was not merely wicked. He was sovereign. The town drifted deeper into his grasp. Men deferred him in council, though he had no vote. Women praised his manners, though his courtesy was colder than steel. Children avoided his gaze, yet followed his word. No one named it aloud, but all bent beneath it. And Harding, once the keeper of life and health, was powerless. His cures failed, his warnings fell flat, his very presence diminished. He was the town's physician no longer. He was its relic, crumbling in the boy's shadow. In his journal he scrawled, the words tearing across the page. "He is not content to take the body. He takes the will. He hollows the town from within." Each man who yields to his silence, each woman who softens beneath his courtesy, is less themselves, more his. They think they live still, but I alone see it. They are being devoured in soul. Then came the midsummer gathering. The town assembled in the square, a rare attempt at fellowship amid their griefs. Tables of bread and pies, children clutching lanterns, old men muttering prayers against the storm-dark sky. Pastor Crane rose to offer blessing. But before he could begin, Timothy stepped forward. He said nothing. He did not need to. He simply lifted his hand, small, pale, perfectly still, and the square fell silent. Pastor Crane's words withered in his mouth. Mothers hushed their infants. The crowd stilled. Every face turned toward the boy. Every breath caught. Even the wind seemed to pause. Timothy lowered his hand. Slowly, with unhurried grace, he smiled, and the people smiled back. Harding felt his stomach turn to ice. He wanted to scream, to break the spell, to shout the truth. Instead, his knees trembled, his tongue failed, and he too stood motionless, caught in the boy's gravity. Later, alone in his house, he wrote with shaking hand, "I cannot flee. I cannot speak. Even I, who knows him, bend beneath him. It is not fear alone that binds us. It is something older, deeper. We are already his. I feel it in my marrow." Then beneath it, smaller, almost illegible, "And still he waits." Harding began to dread the stillness more than the storms. In storms there was at least noise, wind, thunder, rain against the windows. But in the stillness, the silence stretched taut, thin as glass, waiting to be broken. He felt it in his chest, in his teeth, in the ache of his bones. Timothy was waiting, and so the town waited too. Life went on, outwardly. The blacksmith hammered, the mill turned, the market bustled faintly on Saturdays. But beneath it all ran a hush, a restraint, as though everyone knew their days belonged not to themselves. Even laughter sounded borrowed, brief, ashamed. Harding wrote, "We are not his victims. We are his stage. He draws it out, not from necessity, but delight. He savors the quiet before the strike. He fattens on the dread. The true harvest is not death, but anticipation." And then, as if to prove it, a fortnight passed with no new loss. No sudden fevers, no pale corpses, no midnight screams. Relief might have come, but it did not. Instead, the unease deepened. Mothers pulled their children closer. Fathers drank harder in the tavern. The church filled with prayers thick as smoke. The stillness grew unbearable. One evening, Harding passed the Caldwell home. The windows were lit, shadows moving within. He forced himself not to look, not to slow his pace. But from the parlor came the sound of laughter. Not childish, not mirthful, measured, deliberate, too deep for a boy's throat. Harding froze. The hair on his arms rose like needles. The laughter ceased. The curtain shifted. And there was Timothy, standing in the glow, eyes fixed upon him. The boy lifted his hand in a gesture half greeting, half command. Harding staggered backward into the road, heart pounding. He fled, gasping, not daring to look back until his own house swallowed him. That night, in trembling hand, he scrawled his shortest entry yet. He knows the waiting is killing us faster than the taking. It was a miller boy who vanished first. No fever, no scream in the night. He was simply gone. His bed unslept, his boots by the door, his mother's arms empty. The town searched fields, barns, the riverbank. Men carried lanterns into the woods until dawn, calling his name. They found nothing. On the third day, his mother stood in the square, wild-eyed, begging for answers. Pastor Crane prayed with her. Neighbors murmured comfort. But Timothy Caldwell only watched from the edge of the crowd, silent, his hands folded behind his back. Harding saw it, saw the flicker of satisfaction ripple across the boy's face, gone as swiftly as it came. 2 days later, another child went missing, then a third, always without sound, always without trace. Beds left unruffled, windows latched, doors locked, as though the children had risen in night and walked willingly into the dark. The town grew frantic. Mothers slept with knives beside them. Fathers kept watch at windows until their eyes burned red. But still the vanishings came. Harding's journal filled with frantic script. It is no longer the sickness, no longer the stillness. He has changed the game. They are not taken by force. They go to him. They choose him. And that is the truest horror, that the children belong to him as surely as I do. One night, Harding heard himself, the faint creak of his own stairs. Lantern in hand, he crept to the hall, heart clawing his throat. And there at the top of the staircase stood his daughter. Her eyes were half closed, her face slack, her bare feet pointed toward the door. She moved as if in sleep. Harding dropped the lantern and lunged, seizing her shoulders. She struggled weakly, murmuring through her teeth, "He's waiting." Harding shook her, desperate. Who? Who is waiting? Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, her voice was wholly hers, small and terrified. Timothy. Then she collapsed into sobs in his arms. Harding held her until dawn, rocking her, praying in broken whispers. He did not write that night. He could not. But in the morning, when he opened his journal, a new line was waiting there in a hand not his own. She will come to me again. The disappearances did not cease. One by one, children slipped away, quietly, neatly, without struggle. By midsummer's end, a dozen beds lay empty. The town was hollowing, the streets too still, the air thick with dread. And yet no body was ever found, no grave filled. They were not taken. They were given. Harding saw it plain. In the faces of the mothers, gaunt with fear, but silent. In the eyes of the fathers, red with drink, but unresisting. The truth crouched in every silence, in every refusal to name aloud what they knew. Timothy was no thief. Timothy was priest. The town itself had become his congregation, and their children his tithe. Harding wrote with shaking fury, "It is not hunger that drives him. It is ceremony, each vanishing a ritual, each absent to him. He is building something, step by step, child by child. They walked in willingly, because he has already claimed them in their sleep. He does not kill, he collects." And then, at last, Harding understood why Timothy waited. It was not the boy's strength that grew, but the town's surrender. Each silence was a stone in the altar, each vanished child a brick in its foundation. When enough were gone, when the last voice was quieted, then, and only then, would the true harvest come. The physician tried to rouse resistance. He pleaded with neighbors in whispers, begged the pastor to preach, grasped men by the arm and told them what he knew. But each time Timothy was near, on the corner, in the doorway, at the edge of the crowd, silent, courteous, inevitable. And every man Harding spoke to lowered his eyes. Every woman shook her head. Every plea fell dead on the tongue. At last, even Harding's daughter ceased to resist. He woke one night to find her standing once more at the door, her hand upon the latch, her lips moving in some silent prayer. He caught her back, trembling, but her eyes met his with a calm that froze his marrow. "Papa," she whispered, "he's calling." Harding clutched her, his tears wet against her hair. He whispered back, desperate, broken, "Not while I live." But even as he said it, he knew the words were a lie. Harding no longer pretended to practice medicine. Patients still came to his door, pale with fear, trembling with fevers, clutching children to their breasts. He examined them, yes. He mixed tonics, wrote instructions, murmured assurances. But his hand was hollow, his voice a husk. For what good was healing when the true sickness was not of flesh? The children he saved by poultice or draught were gone within nights, walking into the dark as if summoned. No tincture could bar the calling, no prayer could seal their ears. Timothy claimed them when he wished, and Harding's craft was nothing before it. The town accepted this. They spoke no word of defiance. They buried no bodies, wept no public tears. They only moved more slowly, spoke more softly, as though each day were a rehearsal for silence. Harding's journal grew fevered. He does not take the children alone. He takes the hope from their mothers, the fight from their fathers, the faith from their pastor. He is stripping us piece by piece until there will be nothing left but him. Then came the evening Harding saw the truth in its starkest form. He had stepped into the square at dusk, lantern in hand. When he saw them, a line of children barefoot, silent, their faces blank. They walked not in play, nor in dream, but in order as though in procession. And at their head walked Timothy Caldwell, not dragging them, not leading by hand, simply walking, and they followed. His step was measured, his chin lifted, his silence absolute. The children's eyes shone as if lit from within, their bodies moving without hesitation. Harding's knees weakened. He wanted to cry out, to break the spell, to snatch the smallest from the line. But his throat sealed shut, his arms would not lift. The procession passed him, close enough that Timothy's shoulder brushed his sleeve. The boy paused, turned his head, met Harding's eyes, and smiled, not cruelly, not warmly, simply as one might smile at a man who has finally ceased to resist. Then the line moved on, vanishing into the dark. Harding collapsed where he stood, weeping into the dust. That night when he opened his journal. He found no words left within him, only a trembling hand, scratching again and again across the page the same phrase. I belong. I belong. I belong. By autumn, there was no town. The houses still stood, the mill wheel still turned, smoke still rose from chimneys. But those who remained within were no longer themselves. They spoke less, moved less, ate less. They drifted like shades, waiting for summons. Harding moved among them as ghosts among ghosts. He still carried his lantern to the streets at night, still pressed his hand to the shoulders of neighbors, still whispered his broken questions. Do you not see? Do you not know? But their eyes slid past him, dull and unblinking. They no longer wept. They no longer prayed. They no longer resisted. It was not grief that stilled them, but obedience. And always, in the periphery, Timothy Caldwell watched. Never in haste, never with display. Sometimes on a porch, sometimes by the well, sometimes simply standing in the road as though waiting for Harding pass. His courtesy never failed, a nod, a half-smile, a lowered gaze. Yet it was a courtesy that bound like iron. Harding's journal grew sparse. The words came only in fragments. The air is his. The silence thickens. They bow without bowing. I am the last. Then came the night of the harvest moon. Harding awoke to the sound of footsteps, not hurried, not stealthy, but measured in rhythm. He rose, lantern in hand, and looked from his window. And there they were, the townsfolk, all of them, moving as one, silent as a tide. Faces blank, eyes open, steps steady. They filled the street, the square, the alleys, men, women, what children remained. And at their center, as calm as a king at court, walked Timothy Caldwell. The boy's hands were folded neatly before him, his gaze level, his smile faint. He did not lead them. They flowed around him, toward him, into him, as though he were the axis of the world. Harding's lantern shook in his hand. His breath came ragged. He told himself to bar the door, to hide, to run. But his feet moved without command. Down the stairs, into the street, into the throng. And no one hindered him, no one spoke, no one turned. Timothy alone lifted his eyes. Their gaze met across the sea of still faces. And in that gaze Harding felt the last fiber of himself loosen. Not torn, not broken, simply released. He stepped forward. Once, twice, and Timothy smiled. They gathered in the field beyond the town. The moon hung vast and swollen, its pale light washing the grass in silver. The harvest stood uncut, stalks swaying though no wind stirred. It was a place meant for reaping. Yet no sickles shone, no hands reached. Only silence stretched, deep and heavy, as the crowd arranged itself in a perfect circle. Timothy stood at its center. Not a word was spoken, not a gesture given. The townsfolk moved as though guided by a will beyond their own, placing themselves in ranks without falter, their faces vacant, their eyes reflecting the moon like glass. Harding's body obeyed with the rest. He found himself among them, lantern extinguished, hands folded. He tried to scream, to pray, to fight, but nothing answered. His throat was locked, his limbs alien. And then Timothy raised his hand. Not high, not dramatic. Simply a slow lifting, pale fingers opening as though to receive something unseen. The air shifted. The earth seemed to draw breath. And from the circle of silence rose a sound, not from mouths, but from the air itself. A low vibration, deeper than thunder, older than language. Harding felt it in his marrow, in the hollows of his skull, in the beating of his heart. It was not a chant. It was not a hymn. It was a resonance, vast and inevitable, as though the land itself acknowledged its rightful master. Timothy lowered his hand. The sound ceased, but the stillness did not return. For in the silence Harding heard something else, soft, steady, approaching. Footsteps, from the darkness beyond the fields. They came, small figures, one by one, stepping into the moonlight. The lost children. Their faces were blank, their eyes shining, their hands at their sides. They walked in single file, each placing themselves within the circle, their steps unbroken, their silence perfect. The Miller boy, the Caldwell girl, dozens more. And as each child entered, Timothy's smile widened, not with joy nor with malice, but with inevitability, as though the design was unfolding at last. Harding's knees buckled. Tears welled hot in his eyes. He wanted to rush forward, to clutch his daughter's hand, to drag her back into life. But she did not look at him. She did not see him. Her gaze was fixed only on Timothy. The hymn rose and the world narrowed. Harding clutched at the earth, nails clawing dirt, desperate to anchor himself. But even the ground seemed to pulse with the sound, each beat of the hymn shaking through the soil into his marrow. Around him, the townsfolk swayed in unison. Their lips never moved, yet the resonance poured from them, their chests heaving in time to a rhythm older than breath. The children stood at the center, eyes lit from within, their small bodies trembling with the force of what moved through them. And at the still heart of it all stood Timothy Caldwell. The boy's arms were lifted, his face calm, his mouth closed, yet the song poured from him most of all, as if the others were but echoes of his note. His gaze swept the circle, resting finally on Harding. For the first time, Timothy spoke to him alone. "You resist still." The words were not accusation nor anger. They were observation, simple as noting the weather. Harding tried to answer, to spit defiance, but no words came. Only a strangled sob left his lips. Timothy lowered one hand, and the hymn softened, thinning into a single, low drone. The crowd froze silent, awaiting his will. Even the children stilled, their glowing eyes fixed on him. "Come," Timothy said, and Harding's body moved. Against every scream in his mind, every frantic claw of his will, his knees rose, his feet shuffled, and he walked into the circle. The crowd parted like water, making way until he stood before the boy. The hymn's drone vibrated in his skull, blotting thought, stripping him to nothing but trembling flesh. Timothy raised his other hand, small palm open, waiting. Harding stared at it, tears spilling down his face. His heart thundered. His body yearned to obey, to place his hand within the boy's, to join utterly. For a flicker, just a flicker, he thought of his daughter, her laughter before all this, her curls bouncing as she ran to the fields, her small hand in his own. That memory flared like a dying ember, the last warmth in the cold. And Timothy saw it. The boy tilted his head, regarding him with mild curiosity, as one might regard a stubborn insect that lingers longer than expected. "You cannot keep her," Timothy whispered. The hymn swelled again, vast and merciless, and Harding felt the ember extinguish. He was no longer father, no longer physician, only voice, only chord, only him. The last barrier broke. Harding felt his body fall away, first his hands, then his chest, then his face, until he was no more than vibration. His bones rang like struck glass, his blood became rhythm, his breath was stolen and remade a sound. The hymn consumed him. It was not pain, not ecstasy, but erasure. Every grief, every memory, every word of resistance folded into the endless chord, dissolving like salt in the sea. His wife's face, his daughter's laughter, his trembling pen scratching warnings no one would read, all melted, indistinct, forgotten even as he tried to hold them. There was only the resonance. Around him, the townsfolk swayed in perfect accord. Their eyes were closed now, their bodies light, their voices gone. They were no longer people. They were the song itself, woven into harmony, threads indistinguishable. The children stood unmoving, their glowing eyes the fixed stars of this new sky. They did not sing, for they were the source, the root of the chord. From them, the hymn was born, and through Timothy it was bound. Harding's final thought flickered, small, trembling, fading. "If I am gone, who writes this?" And then even that was gone. The hymn had no beginning. The hymn had no end. It only was. And Timothy Caldwell stood at its center, smiling. When morning came, the town stood silent. The fields were untouched, the houses unburned, the streets swept clean by night's cold air. But no smoke rose from chimneys. No doors opened. No voices stirred. Those who passed through in later years spoke of it with unease. They said the place was not abandoned. Tools rested neatly in sheds. Food sat unspoiled on tables. Beds were made as if awaiting their occupants. But no occupants remained. Not vanished. Not fled. Simply gone. The journals of Dr. Elias Harding were found in his home. pages filled with frantic scrawl that grew thinner, shakier, before halting altogether. No body lay within the house. No sign of struggle marked the floor. Only the lantern, still sitting cold upon his desk. Traveler spoke, too, of a sound, faint low, on the edge of hearing, carried on still nights across the fields. A vibration, like the deep pluck of a string, or the murmur of a choir far away. Some swore the earth itself seemed to hum beneath their boots, pulsing faintly in time with a rhythm they could not name. And some, those unlucky enough to linger too long, claimed they saw him, a boy standing in the distance, pale, calm, hands folded, watching, never moving closer, never needing to, for in his presence they felt the pull, that quiet summons, that subtle loosening of the will. And more than one traveler was said to have walked willingly into the fields, vanishing into the silence without cry or struggle. The town's name was stricken from maps, its history unspoken in polite company. But still the land remained, and still the sound lingered, as though the hymn required no choir, no congregation. It sang itself. It always had. And at its center, patient as a grave, Timothy Caldwell waits. The harvest is not yet done. Deal not look away. Do not pretend you did not hear it. You have walked with me through the silence, through the hymn, through the harvest. And if you are still here, it is because part of you already belongs. The song spreads. It waits in shadows, in fields, in the quiet hours of night when your house seems too still. It will come for you as it came for them. And when it does, you will remember this voice. Do not wander alone. Do not fall silent. Stay with us. Stay inside the circle. Subscribe. Join the hymn.